We are now moving on and open up our space. So as you can see, this forum will flow without breaks, because we have an intention to allow people step in at the moment when you feel you're up to it, and continue. You can kind of step out, step back in at your convenience. I say it's a little bit like a train in the metro, where you enter at the station where you need to, as get out at the station where you need to, and re-enter again whenever you need to. So because of that, without any further pause, I would like us to move into the next conversation, which is kind of taking further the messages that Erwin brought into our space and the panelists before that. The discovery of the role of our species and the discovery of new qualities that we need to embrace in order to serve the sacred mission that Erwin was talking about. And the leader of this panel, the facilitator of this panel, is Alexander. So I pass over to you, Alexander, for introducing the panel further.
Thank you so much, Pavel. And wow, so this is, you imagine we have 3 days of this. How rich is this? For me, it's a little bit like eating a chocolate cake, that's very dense, and I feel like I want to take little bites of this, but we are just continuing through this. So let's take a pause just to savor where we are right now. And in fact, I see, Marylin, you've just started your camera here. And before I introduce everyone on this next panel, let's just have a pause to go through. Marylin, you're so good at helping us with grounding and with meditation. Maybe there's a moment of a few words. I could invite Marylin Hamilton, who will be on our next panel. I will introduce everyone in the panel in a moment. But before we formally get going in the panel, Marylin, could you perhaps lead us on a little grounding?
Thank you, Alexander. You've been reading my mind. I thought that would be a really good thing for our process, but I do like Pavel's idea that we're on a moving system of sharing. And so maybe we could do both. So let's imagine that the doors of our transportation system have moved up in front of us, but they haven't quite opened, and they won't open until we have a few seconds of silence that I will ring in with this chime and ring out with a chime. So everyone just take a deep breath and enjoy this time of silence. Thank you. And now we can imagine that in front of us, the doors are opening for us to enter the next car. And I pass it back to you, Alexander, to be our conductor.
So much. Thank you so much, Marylin. So let me introduce this this panel a little bit here. This is going to be a real conversation and an exploration of what it really means to live into that it's a challenge, but it's a dream that Erwin shared with us as well. This kind of planetary consciousness, and Francois today was talking about the planetizenship, right? What does it mean to ascend to the age of planetary consciousness? We have with us today 4 wonderful, wonderful people, humans who are humaning well in wonderful ways. I will ask each of you just to share maybe 3 minutes or so about your vision, and then we'll move into more of a conversation. We have with us today Anneloes Smitsman, who do I see on here? I don't see her. Do we see her? And if Anneloes, if you're here, if you can.
I'm here.
Okay. And your camera there, okay. And as long as you can wave and we can see you also here, that'd be excellent. Cool. And then, so people can see you. Thank you so much, Anneloes. is the founder and CEO of EARTHWise Center, which is doing amazing things in the world to bring forward the idea of a planetary civilization through gaming, through constitutions, and so on. So she will talk a little bit about that. Marylin Hamilton, who we just heard from, who set the stage a little bit in terms of the meditation, is the founder of Integral Cities Meshworks and co-founders of an initiative called Living Cities Earth, bringing people together in ways that express our human potential, our potential to human well together for aliveness. And Gary Jacobs is the president and CEO of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. We have several other people from the World Academy of Arts and Sciences here as well, including Mila Popovic. And he's also the chairman and of the board and CEO of the World University Consortium. So thank you, Gary, for being with us. And we have Jude Currivan, well-known author, just renowned leader in the area of understanding the cosmos, the cosmic evolution, and the evolution of consciousness. And I think this idea of a unitive narrative, and indeed the work that Jude has done as co-founder of the WholeWorld-View, and the ways in which, Jude, you are also holding the reframing that it's not just that we're living in a time where this particular universe has gone from a big bang into maybe a big crunch. It's kind of very masculine frames, but you speak about it in terms of a big breath. And I think this is what we are all now taking together. So looking forward to hearing more about the unitive narrative that is calling us in this vision for developing our own planetary consciousness, what that will take. So just a few more words here, and then I would love to go in turn, which I mentioned each of. We will start with Anneloes. Charles Darwin wrote one of his books called The Descent of Man, and Jacob Bronowski also wrote another book after that called The Ascent of Man. And it has been said that man, or humans more correctly, has descended from the trees, and we have been descending ever since. So there's a little play with that. And the idea is, how do we not just keep descending, but also ascending into our higher potential? And so what we are exploring in this panel now is going to be the question of what responsibilities we hold as a planetary species, and what kind of ethical frameworks that we can embody and enact in order to cultivate this planetary consciousness. Anneloes, over to you.
Thank you so much, and great to be here with all of you. Thank you all for bringing us together. I think that in itself is an act of helping us ascend to that planetary consciousness. Now, I'll speak a little bit about my vision rather than about what we do, because I think that is more in the spirit of this meeting. So from a developmental perspective, we were looking really at the maturation here of our species. Then it might help us to reflect on what are the conditions that are present right now that are helping us to ascend to this next stage in our evolutionary developments. And we could look at it then in terms of the conditions, almost like we're going through the birth canal and it's getting tighter, less wiggle room for excuses. There are the planetary conditions, of course. If we're looking now that humanity has crossed 6 out of 9 critical planetary boundaries that were necessary for a safe operating zone for human activities and lives for generations to come. So there is that context as well. Then there's an interesting paradox. We live in an informationally unified universe, as Jude always speaks about so beautifully. And yet we live in worlds that have been socially, politically, and economically divided. So what a contrast. So we live in a fundamentally unified universe, and yet the worlds that we've been creating as humans seem to be doing the opposite. However, because we are in an interdependent world, the consequences of those actions are also felt by all of us. So it might be good to really to see what is really going on, and if we're then looking at these divided narratives and the politics of division, the politics of disunity, and how that's been institutionalized also in our legal structures. And then the way that we at EARTHWise look at that, and also many of those in social game change theory, is as a Moloch game dynamics. And a Moloch archetype is an archetype that's thousands of years old, that dates back to the time when humanity believed it needed to sacrifice the children in order to gain something. And we are now.
Anneloes, I'm just going to jump in here just for a moment. People really want to hear what you're saying, and maybe either you get closer to the microphone, or because we are just managing to hear you.
It? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we can hear you, but I think we would like to hear you easily.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can put the microphone and the speaker even higher. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you. Great. So going back then to Moloch, yeah? Moloch, we could say, is the disruptor that makes that we can't hear each other and we don't hear these signals of our greater unity. And so the Moloch game dynamics that are operating and having, in many ways kept humanity stuck so that we didn't ascend to that planetary consciousness, are all about making decisions whereby we are sacrificing long-term collective well-being for short-term personal or myopic gain. And it's therefore incredibly important that if we want to ascend to a planetary consciousness, that we address those underlying game dynamics and that we change that. And I think that sometimes doesn't get enough presence in a lot of the movements around the sustainability crisis. So the planetary consciousness, my vision for how I hold that planetary consciousness and its ascent is really a species that starts to realize its relationship within the greater web of life, and to understand that that already is a planetary consciousness, and Gaia herself is that planetary consciousness. Humans are part of that. And it's really now up to us to kind of open our hearts and our minds to that, and realizing how we already are one with that. And how that planetary consciousness that's already here, that is given, starts to get an experience in the human world. So how are we making that tangible? And how are we creating then the new operating systems, the new design principles, the new ethical frameworks, also planetary frameworks, planetary governance systems, stewardship models as well, that truly help to embody now that planetary consciousness, so that it is not just a principle, but it's becoming a lived experience for all of us. And if I'm looking right now, of course, at the terrible violence that is happening within the Middle East, and the escalation potentials within that as well, it seems that we are truly challenged right now to step into that from a hard place felt, and not to go back into the old triggers of revenge, not to go back to wanting to seek justice in that Molochian kind of way, and to sacrifice against something in the name of peace. No, we can't do that. It's not about, if we do things in the name of peace, it's about all of us included. And maybe that is the maturation that is necessary, and also the power that we are holding here as a collective to truly stand for how does a mature species respond to the very challenges that it has created, but also to the opportunities that are unprecedented right now because also of those challenges, but also because of the new technologies that we are also bringing together that are helping us, like here, to be connected in a whole new story, and in the making for the first time really of the co-creation of these new emerging civilizations. And with that, I'll pass it on to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Anneloes. And exactly, so what we're looking for here as we're listening with each other is to breathe in and to connect as well, to really be the change we wish to see in the world. And so as we each share, we can hopefully also find the red thread and weave what we are listening into. Marylin, I pass it to you, and afterwards to Gary, and then Jude.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, Anneloes. Yes, I agree with Anneloes that the human species is in a new stage of maturation. And as you pointed out in your introduction for me, I take the voice of the city. So human habitats, not just the city as we formally think about it, but everything from villages all the way up to our megacities. And I don't think that these are outside of nature. I'm one of the people that considers these as natural evolutionary outcomes that Gaia herself has called forth. You know, when I first started to explore this, I was thinking about it through developmental scales and levels of individuals and teams and organizations. But then I heard James Lovelock be interviewed, and he was asked whether he had a very good impression of humans. And he said, well, actually, humans are Gaia's reflective organs. And I thought, when I heard that, oh, the cities are the organs, the organizations are the organelles, and the individuals in the cities are the cells. So it opened up for me the fractalness of the human system in relationship to Gaia. And so that oftentimes we think of, you know, the individual, and then we think of our groupings, and then we think of the planet. But I always like to point out there is an intermediate fractal, and I think of it as the city, as the human habitat. When we look at many of the diagrams or images from space and look back at the Earth, what we see is the light, and it is the light of the human habitats. And so I think that my view of the evolution of Gaia and where we are as humans and where we are as collectives and cities is that we are indeed building mycelial webs amongst ourselves, across ourselves. That beautiful introduction that we had this afternoon to thinking about ourselves as a tree, well, that is another image for us to think of how our cities serve us. I've often looked at forests and wondered what they would have to teach us about our cities. And as I live in the eco-village of Findhorn in Scotland, I think they have a great deal to teach us. So I have also, in listening to many of the sacred practices and rituals that I'm introduced to here in the eco-village, have learned how deeply Gaia does connect with us. It's not just an esoteric idea that we are fractals, but I do think there's something that Gaia expresses, as Irvin just shared with us, about the consciousness of love. And so I do think the care that we as humans know is what connects us to one another. In fact, I think of it as a Gaian code of care, where she cares for herself as planet and all the places and all the people and all of the persons. And that code of care, from person to people to place to planet, is really a way of looking at how interconnected we are, and that we cannot, in the best of evolutionary impulse, express one without connecting to the other. So my vision for planetary consciousness, for planetary connection, is that we become intimately committed to living this Gaia code of care, and that our cities are intimately connected with all life, not just human life, and so that the nature and the ecoregions in which our cities, our human habitats sit, become our responsibilities as well. So this is my way of thinking about the Gaian connections in fractal terms, in terms of complexity, but bringing it right back to the heart, bringing it to the expression of care as the natural way, the natural intelligence that connects us in an evolutionary way to all life. So I think that's what I will use as my introduction and pass it back to, I think it's now Gary.
Gary, please, over to you.
Thank you, Alexander. It's great to be here and to listen to our friends. I'd like to start with something to say that over the last few hundred years, what we see today is the result of very rapid social evolution, which by the nature of it has been more external than internal, because the mind's growth and multiplication of knowledge and capacity grows faster than our capacity for emotional cultural adaptation. And the speed has just been increasing so much that there's a wider and wider gap. And our emphasis, our education, our society is so much focused on the external, so much focused on the technology and the know-how and the objective world, that as if all the answers are there, that we really tend to lose more and more touch with the inner world, which is really the subjective dimension of our life and consciousness, which is really the determinant of what we're going to get. Just as an aside, I lead the World Academy, as Alexander mentioned, which was founded by people like Einstein and Oppenheimer after World War II. And interestingly enough, it was founded because of this mismatch, because with the mental development, the scientific and technological development, and the development of human values and our capacity to adjust. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project for the atomic bomb, was actually one of the founders. When they created the bomb, they really thought they were asked to do it as an act of patriotism. They thought they were saving the world from the consequences of defeat. And afterwards, they realized that the technology had released a genie from the box, that we didn't have the maturity to contain. The power that it represented was more than our political systems could manage. And he and others who were involved, Einstein and others, tried very hard to convince the government here, not only here, but in other countries, that, look, we may have developed it, but this should never be used as a weapon. And we should stop now and create the kind of global systems needed to ensure that we use the positive parts of it, the power of the energy, but don't use the negative parts of it. And of course, the political system is governed by other interests and motives and concerns, and we've got power, and power is the most security, we thought. The greatest security we'll have is we have more power than others, and therefore we'll be safe. But actually what we ended up was with a Cold War and the creation of 70,000 nuclear weapons. So kids all over the world, including in America, were shivering and fantasizing about when the bomb is going to drop. So this is I think this is an example of a much wider phenomenon of a mismatch in evolution, because our culture is moving rapidly externally, but we haven't really learned how to consciously develop ourselves emotionally, psychologically, socially, culturally, in relationship to the earth, in relation to other people, and even in relation to ourselves. So today we've got this unusual situation. We had the COVID, which really showed us all our faith in our technology and our economic system can be just stopped and close to a halt. Global trade, global education, everything could just be stopped. And then the war in Ukraine, and then and now what's happening in Palestine, and of course, hanging all over it is the climate change, something that tells us there's no way we can handle these issues through more economic activity or more technology. We've got to learn how to live with ourselves, with other people. We've got to build a global governance system that's going to work. And the consequence is, in spite of all our phenomenal accomplishments, we have higher levels of insecurity today than we've had in maybe since World War II. Greater prosperity for many people, for more people than ever before, not everybody certainly, and yet greater insecurity. And that really tells us there's something wrong with this approach, which is so externally focused, to think that this is going to solve our problems. And I think that's where we are. We've got to bring it back. The one thing, and I'll stop with this, the one thing Alexander didn't mention is the current work that the Academy is doing is with the United Nations on a campaign called Human Security for All. And it's a very simple concept to say, whatever we're doing, we have to look at its impact on everybody. And we've got to look at its impact on people. And that also means we have to look at our impact on all life on Earth, because the security of everybody depends on our harmony with the planet. And yet, even when we talk about our challenges like global climate change, we talk about it in terms of numbers and CO2 levels. We don't really talk about it in terms of its impact on people and our lives. We're divorced. We're psychologically divorced from the impact of our behaviors on ourselves. And that's a question of maturation. It's a question of, we haven't learned how to rapidly evolve emotionally and culturally and spiritually.
Gary, thank you so much. And thank you for mentioning that campaign. Very important. Great. Well, before we open this to our shared conversation, Jude, I have you here as the privileged position of being the last one to speak here. So you can hold all of this and provide the transition. Of course, we are in your hands, and thank you so much for sharing with us your views.
Thank you, everyone. And I would say I'm in your hearts, and each of us are in each other's hearts. And this is why it seems to me we have the most incredible opportunity in the story of our human journey at this point to come together in the universal heart. And I'd just like to sort of go back to what Marylin, Anneloes, and Gary have so beautifully said, and also what you said so beautifully, Alexander, and Irvin before this. It seems to me that we have a dis-ease, a collective dis-ease of separation. And we have a worldview, a collective worldview that's actually based on 19th century science. It didn't really even, salute 20th century science on the way through. And yet we're now at the beginning of the 21st century, and the leading edge of science, the scientific breakthroughs that we're now discovering are turning that old 19th century mechanistic, deterministic, separatist, materialist worldview literally on its head. And what they're doing instead, and I know Irvin's referred to this, and he and I have worked for many years together on this emerging new understanding that's based on the evidence, and this is why it's so significant at all scales of existence across many fields of research, is converging with universal wisdom teachings. Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita when the first atomic bomb went off: "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Einstein too, as Gary well knows, understood that separation is a delusion of consciousness. Many of the leading edge scientists of their time, including Newton, and back to Francis Bacon and onwards for 400 years, understood that science, ultimately, if it did its job properly, would actually reveal the divine. Ultimately, essentially, reveal the divine. And that's the position we're now at. Because what the leading edge science is discovering is that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. As Anneloes knows many times, and Marylin too, I go on about this, it's my favorite quote. Mind and consciousness isn't something we have, it's what we and the whole world are. The appearance of our universe, the appearance of our world, its energy and matter and space-time is now being realized and understood to emerge from deeper levels of intelligence and cosmic causation. It's a living universe that exists and evolves as a non-locally unified entity. And that bit is settled science because it, universal non-locality was the basis of the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics. We're now in a place of settled science on such an understanding, an emergent understanding of our world and our universe and thus ourselves. And the point here is that we also now are realizing that our universe doesn't just exist and evolve as a living, non-locally unified entity. It embodies an evolutionary impulse to evolve from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity. And it does so because at its fundamental basis, it is not only a living universe, it's a loving universe. If we can define love in the greatest, grandest sense of relationship, then our universe and everything in it is innately and fundamentally interrelated. And we've also been told that it began 13.8 billion years ago as a big bang. We know it wasn't big, but it wasn't a bang in the sense of an implicit chaos. Instead, it's incredibly fine-tuned and ordered as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. That ever since the space has expanded and time's flowed, that ongoing big breath has enabled ever more experience, exploration, evolution, individuated expression, individuated awareness to be manifest within its glorious evolutionary journey. And for me, what this can help us with, first of all, it brings meaning and purpose back into our world and therefore us. As Irvin once said, it re-enchants the universe in that regard. But it also is a very personal relationship with our universe, because the Vedic word for breath is the same as for spirit. And when we talk about the big breath of our entire universe, it breathes through us in every moment. With every breath we take, we are the living, loving universe breathing through us. This for me, and the evidence of this, which is compelling and extensive, which I write about in The Cosmic Hologram, the story of Gaia, based on many, many, many thousands of research. Anneloes and I have written about it together. Marylin and I have written about it together. Alexander, you and I have worked together on this for many years. But this now is coming to a point where this understanding has been able to articulate a unitive narrative founded on unitive science, and a unitive narrative able to underpin and frame transformational change. And we are a narrative sharing species. We've told stories around the campfires. You know, I've had the great privilege of sitting with Indigenous elders and youngers, sitting around campfires from Australia to the Arctic, South America to India, to tell stories. And Indigenous stories are Indigenous stories of wholeness, of unity, of a web of life that embraces far more than biological life. You know, we're all talking, Marylin, I thought you spoke so beautifully about cities as the sort of organelles of Gaia's sentience and other cells. Anneloes, the EARTHWise charter, my goodness, what wonderful work. And Gary, your academy is doing marvelous work. But it seems to me that now we can speak not just of life as the biology, but life as the entire living universe, and therefore a Gaia-sphere rather than a biosphere. The Gaia-sphere of the entire sentience of Gaia and ourselves. So with that, an invitation for us to come into the universal heart of a living and loving and evolutionary universe, I just wanted to say two more things in terms of us as a planetary consciousness. We can't stop at our planet. It's an artificial stopping, just as it would be if it was our bodies or our cities, because our loving, living, planetary, sentient Gaia is a planetary being within a living, loving, evolutionary universe. So I would invite us within an out-breath and an in-breath in every moment and every way we are, in our being and our doing, to act local, feel global, and think cosmic. Because when we out-breath to that, it is an intimate out-breath, because it's a very intimate in-breath. And I'd just like to finish with the point that I can't remember who talked to it. I think Alexander, you did at the beginning, about the descent of man and the ascent of man, the descent from the trees and the ascension of conscious evolution. And I'd like to take us back 6.5 million years for a moment, because that's when our earliest hominin forebear, known as Ardipithecus ramada, came down from the trees, where all the other great apes said, no, we're not going to do that. We're here to stay. We're okay up here, safer up here. That crazy ancestor of ours decided to come down from the trees and live a life of curiosity and exploration. And at the very fundamental basis of it, Ardi, the male and the females of the species were the same size and had the same teeth. And that may seem so trivial, but it meant that they didn't dominate. There was no male-female domination within the species. Instead, as far as we have the evidence, they evolved for bonding, for bond pairing. In other words, we were born for love. We were born to take that universal expression of an innately related universe all the way through to this moment as an exploration of what it might mean to be love. And Gaia, through 4.5 billion years, every level of complexity in that evolutionary arc has been one of greater cooperation. So when I wrote the story of Gaia, the intelligence, the genius, the adamantine, absolute, I will not be stopped here, of that evolutionary arc, for me, the most foundational was the evolution of empathy. We find empathy from the very earliest coming together. We find cooperation from the earliest coming together. But I would take it back to the very beginning of our universe, because our universe exists as a wholly interrelated way that enables those relationships to ever further complexify, deepen, widen, become part of the individuated expression of a universe that exists to evolve. And we're at this moment, this collective moment of choice. And as someone said, extinction or evolve, I think it was Irvin. But this is our case. And it's not that Gaia will not go on. Gaia will. But surely we want to be part of that journey. It seems to me that the whole universe is inviting us to do that. You know, we talk about, Ken Wilber talks about wake up, grow up. Dustin de Perma talks about, you know, clean up, show up. I talk about link up and lift up. That's our opportunity. That's why we're here together. And it seems to me that this, with all the challenges, is our invitation, because it seems to me too that peace is our global graduation test. Because if we can achieve peace within our collective psyche, that invitation by the universe is well and truly answered for our next onward step in our conscious evolution.
Thank you so much, Jude. Goodness, you know, wonderful that you were weaving this together here. I knew it was good to put you there and having the last word of the group. But now we're going to bridge this over into a conversation among us. And I would like to turn our attention a little bit to a few things here, so we can contemplate this together, and then perhaps open it up also for others who might want to share some comments, insights, and questions from the broader audience. But I love what Jude was just talking about, how we were born for love. I mean, you know, Jude is a scientist, and this is something which I hear in the messages from Gary, from Marylin, from Anneloes. It's in also all of the songs, right? We were born for love. So I think what I would like us to focus on is three things here. One is fundamentally, in this panel, we're looking for is how do we curate? How do we foster the emergence of this planetary consciousness, this Gaia sphere, as Jude was talking about? What do we do individually, collectively? So this to explore a little bit what kind of ethos in action we could think about and we could share. And I wanted to also just to reflect on this, the engagements that we bring to this, and these ideas of our abilities. We have our sense abilities, and this is what we are sensing. This is what we're sensing the resonance in the words that we're hearing of each of our panelists in this session. I think for me have resounded within me a sense of this feels right, this is right. There's the sensibility, and that fosters a sense of responsibility. How now can I respond? And this is what I would like to explore, because it's key tied to the imagine ability, our ability to dream, as this whole forum is about, how we can dream together. And it takes that courage. It takes that courage to dare for love ability. And I think that is truly one of the sources there. That's something that we have the ability to give, the love, and also to be in that engagement. So how do we live into this unitive narrative? How do we take those steps? And now I would simply like to open it up, and I'm not going to call on anyone in particular, and then maybe you can also pass it to each other or take it from each other. Who would like to begin from our panel? Gary.
Well, I would start, we're talking at the universal level, global level, it's big. I would say the best place to start is at our personal level. And I agree with the basic premises that are being spoken, but that's made real by high spiritual experience. But where the world starts with our own environment, our own lives. And I think if we discover individually and personally the relationship between what's inside and outside and our capacity to create more positive environment by an inner mastery, I think we get the key for humanity. This can't be done by philosophy, can only be done by discovering the power we have, the psychological, the subjective dimension of our own consciousness and how powerful it is for governing the external world. Right now, we've got an external world which is an expression of our conflicted emotions and our conflicted thoughts. And once we know it's not out of our hands, it's not something that's running away with it. It's something that the mastery comes individually and collectively by our realizing how important our own development is, our own self-development is, and that of everybody else. So I'm just trying to give a starting point for this, where everybody can start and see the impact on their own lives.
I was muted. Jude, please. Yes.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Gary. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And that's really what I was trying to say in terms of act local. What is it in with ourselves? Because acting local does begin with ourselves. We're as local as we get. We can't get any more local than each of us. And that is absolutely foundational. And then what is around us, and how can we embody love within all our choices on that level? And it's not for me an either or, it's an and. And when we appreciate just how intimate the universe is within us, as well as around us, then that relationship, I think, invites us into that ever deeper level of a loving being and doing in the world. I'd just like to just very briefly, just perhaps bring in something. We're not moving from a standing start here. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but we're also, it seems to me, part of all of us. This incredible evolutionary impulse is flowing through all of us. It's within us. It's flowing through us. And so just to refer back to the unitive narrative, or a unitive narrative, as Alexander mentioned, I mean, that came out of a gathering of about 100 change makers working with the United Nations over many, many years, and appreciating that with a perspective of separation, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and indeed anything and any potential for transformational change would not be able to be implemented, because what they were doing were responses to the symptoms of a dis-ease rather than going to the root cause of the dis-ease, i.e. separation. So coming together with that perspective, drafted a unitive narrative. And late last year, from that unitive narrative, the United Nations, for the first time in 75 years, adopted what it calls a thematic cluster based on unitive action, in other words, wholeness in action. And 17 NGOs began that. More and more are joining. I'm part of a whole initiative on unitive economics, actually transforming our economics, which again is based on separation and materiality, with leading economists such as John Fullerton, David Corton, some names you'll know, Bill Reed, incredible folks who are all now linking up and lifting up together to see what we can do to move the dial with many others as a transformation on economics. And somebody put into the chat about education, and there's a very newly emergent group of global educators called the Unitive Education Collaboratory that's working on this unitive approach to education. So anything with unitive in front of it, if you come across it, chances to be these sort of initiatives. So anyone who's interested in becoming part of this, the work that Gary does, Marylin, Anneloes, Alexander, the Laszlo Institute, we at WholeWorld-View, there are now more and more and more of us linking up and lifting up together from a unitive perspective and scaling and speeding up enormously going forward. So the mainstream media doesn't report this. And I think, like a lot of politics, the mainstream media may be the last to come to the party in many ways. But there's so much more happening that I feel does give us authentic hope that may appear to be happening if one was to look at the news or to see the way that this is not reported in the mainstream, but it is happening.
Thank you, Jude, and I'll pass it in order here, first to Anneloes and then to Marylin. But just to say two things briefly. This unitive narrative, it's as you have written about, Jude, and as we're exploring in the Laszlo Institute as well, and in many other places. It's a non-dual universe. This is a perennial wisdom that we have seen in many places, but this is the idea. How do we live into that and stop separating ourselves? Gary talked about this as well. This is the illusion of separation. But the moving from, and Marylin has put this into the chat, and so has Pavel, moving now from these sustainable development goals, including also explorations, Thomas Bjorkman and others, with the inner development goals, and now to the evolutionary development goals. We're going to have a whole session on this at the end of today. So this is exactly where we're going to explore these kind of frames. Please stay tuned with that. But now, over to Anneloes.
Thank you. And thank you, Jude, for presencing that, helping us see what's already happening. I think that's really, really important, also as part of living the new story. So, Alexander, I want to weave it back and now, and you're hearing me better, I guess now, right? Yeah, okay. I found the problem. So I want to weave it back to your question, which was about the new abilities, sensibilities, and also entering into the dreaming. So if we realize that we are part of this planetary consciousness, and we're working with that planetary consciousness to further activate and evolve our human potential. What starts to happen then is that you're able to tap into all kinds of intelligences and wisdoms that vastly expand your human capacities in the most incredible ways. I mean, if I even look at my own books, and I'm sure with Jude, for you, with Gaia's story, it was the same. It's like, you can't write those kind of books from just your own human potential. That is a partnership with this planetary consciousness and cosmic wisdom and intelligence as well. So even here for all of us, if you really hold that intention, may this planetary consciousness evolve and activate my human potential in such ways that I can truly make a generative contribution to the maturation of our species. That alone in itself already produces a shift, and out of that intention and then putting that into application, develop all kinds of new sensibilities, sensories, organs even, that are really amazing. I see that as an expanded understanding of our own humanity. So that's one thing. And the other thing about the dreaming into, so every living system, from a system science perspective, so every living system is also an imaginal system. So the imaginal is not just a mind, it's a feature of mind, but it's a feature of non-local, the non-local that Jude spoke of as well. So what you're seeing with living systems is that they evolve and they renew and they transform and they heal by accessing non-local potentials. And that's really fundamental also for understanding our evolutionary development. So when you're tapping into that greater dreaming, if you're tapping into the imaginal, you're accessing the higher coherencies and greater potencies of our non-local universe, as well as the cosmic wisdom. So this way, the act of dreaming into also our greater future human potential, but also this beautiful birth of truly becoming aware of who we are as a species, as a planetary consciousness, is also, by so doing, you're also supporting as a living system yourself, the renewal also of our world and of our planet.
Well, Anneloes, thank you so much. This idea that dreaming is action. And Shay Brown has also put some of that comment, and we'll be hearing from her as well tomorrow, because this, the dream time that we started with and we talked about a bit here, this is dreaming into existence, our being, connecting with the imaginal frames. Fantastic. Marylin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anneloes and Jude and Gary. So inspiring. And when I'm asked, so how can you make this practical? I do always really love Jude's reframing of Patrick Geddes' think global, act local, which he pronounced in 1890. I always give my head a shake. So to act local and feel global and think cosmic has always been like such an inspiration when I learned that from Jude. But I still bring it back in the cities to something you can do every day. I call it Karma Yoga. And
You just went on mute, Marylin, just so you know. Sorry. So pick up from Karma.
Yeah, there I am back. So the practice of Karma Yoga is to care for self, others, place, and planet. And I think of it as actually a yoga that you do every day. I do it every day. I start every day with an intention to understand how I will care for self, others, place, and planet. And at the end of every day, I ask, how have I done that? And I think that as we do this, since so many of the others on this panel have spoken about the intelligences, so that was something that I set as the pattern for my first book, was to look at the city through the lens of a GPS, which has at its center evolutionary intelligences. And that was first published in 2008. So I'm feeling that I've been very alone for a long time. So it's really wonderful to be with people who see this as the natural way that the evolutionary impulse really flows through. I identified 12 intelligences for cities because I thought if cities are truly complex, adaptive, living, integral systems that are able to care, then it would have intelligences, just like we think of individuals as having multiple intelligences, or as Jude has revealed, how intelligent the planet is, how intelligent life is, how intelligent the whole universe is. And so we also mentioned, how can we bring into practice these intelligences? You'll see that inquiry intelligence is one of the intelligences that I identified. So we often think that we have to come up with the right answer, but in fact, we have to be perpetually curious. We have to recognize the intelligence of thinking of the questions that allow us to connect with care and each other and all of life, I think is the way that we can actually respect the intelligences that Gaia has evolved through us, and that we can pay back to her by demonstrating what are the best questions that we can ask. And I would say that as I'm working through an eco-village that is sort of actually mirroring everything that's going on in the rest of the world, the challenges that we're facing here, that if we want to have a good inquiry intelligence to figure out what to do next, it has to be mastered, has to be matched with the willingness to listen. So this deep, deep listening, I think, is also an aspect of the intelligence of care. So those are some of the thoughts that I would add to our wonderful group here. Thank you.
How rich and how wonderful. Thank you so much. This idea of the GPS, Francois Tadei also mentioned that earlier. And, Bela Banathy and others have talked about the need for an evolutionary guidance system, something that helps us, collectively envision our way forward. Of course, the Aboriginals have dream time. I mean, we have to remember these ways of being. We can do this. And this kind of relational intelligence, Marylin, you were talking about the variety of intelligence, and Gary and Anneloes and Jude, you were talking about this. And Jude in particular, you were talking about the empathy, right? The need for this empathetic intelligence. This is perhaps the next challenge of this century of humanity, empathetic intelligence to match our technological prowess, right? So to empathize in a way with the dream of the earth, right? This what is the earth dreaming? John Seed of Earth Island Institute once said, how can we learn to think like a mountain? What a great challenge, to think like a mountain. How can we dream the dream the earth is dreaming, right? So these shifts in our being, so that we're not just human beings protecting the rainforest, but we are the rainforest protecting itself. We are the earth in its becoming. This is a beautiful preparation now for our next section, where we're going to listen to Jeremy Lent, who's going to be talking to us a bit about the potential of moving into and envisioning an ecological civilization. But before I pass it back, I wanted just to check in also with Pavel to see if there's anything from the chat or conversation that needs to be shared in the last 3 minutes here. And then I will pass it back to me after that, Pavel, and I want to say a final word here of thanks to the group.
Well, thank you, Alexander. I feel the conversation was very rich. And again, I see the chat as not a parallel reality, but an interesting additional flow where conversation can happen to let's say, something that is happening on the main scene, the main stage. And really appreciate all the threads that have it. Seems to me that I already begin seeing how different parts of this forum sort of form a fractal structure. For example, Mosari in the chat raised the need for discovering new questions that are guiding us collectively, and that's exactly one of the things we are going to explore in the panel after Jeremy Lent is going to speak. And the idea of new types of goals, and perhaps they are not goals in the sense that as sustainable development goals are, but something that can capture the dimensions of our inner evolution, also the fact that we need something where these goals are constantly co-created and constantly evolving themselves. It's something that we need to begin discovering, as Anneloes is doing amazing work with this planetary scale governing systems, not only the vision or the idea that we need to cultivate this planetary level of consciousness. Thank you for pointing out to the fact that planetary consciousness is there, and just maybe that we are occasionally disconnected from it, but Gaia is a conscience many begin to recognize that there is a conscious, super conscious being that is enveloping us, so to say. So we need to really tune into perhaps that level of consciousness to really more adequately operate. So I feel there is a lot of richness, and let's see each of our conversations as a kind of fractal representing the whole that we still need to discover. Thank you, Jude, for bringing this unity narrative. But I sense part of the story is that unity narrative also requires that profound sensing into unity rather than intellectually grasping the unity. And thank you for manifesting that in the conversation. Alexander?
Thank you. We're at time now, so I'm going to say thank you so much. You are such dear friends, and I'm so inspired by each of you. Anneloes, Marylin, Gary, Jude. Thank you for being here from my heart. This is the heart connection. Just to say, I think all of us are here, are breathing with you, being breathed by you. This is a conspiracy, you know. We are conspiring. We are breathing together. And indeed, this is what we need to be doing. So thank you again. Wonderful. Let's all give our round of applause, maybe virtually, but here we are. Thank you again. And we now pass it to you, Pavel, to shift over to our next.
Mhm.
Our next.
Yes.